You're the storage facility. They didn't fit in the trailer.
Perks of being Cope director. I just ordered them.
Ah.
We got a Sean. Sure thing, Sean. Sean Reeves got us a grant through some organization that bought enough. It was enough money in the grant for 45 helmets because we have to replace ours, every few years just because they age out. And was planning on buying them for in-person Ryla last year, and that didn't happen. So,
You guys still on track for this year?
seems that way. We haven't had board discussions about it in a bit, but I think seem to be leaning towards still just doing, requiring vaccination or negative test. Or honestly, at this rate, it might end up being both. We'll see.
What'd y'all get into for New Year's? Anybody have something fun they did?
Well, I was going to wait till there were a little more people on the call, but I had a really fun New Year's.
Congrats. That's awesome.
And now he's making me dinner, so really a true keeper.
Oh wow. Look at that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was New Year's Eve is my birthday too, so it was a fun night.
Ah, okay. Got out on the town in Austin?
Yeah. Went out to dinner with some friends, went to Trail of Lights, where I was then presented with what looked like a ring pop at first, which he has jokingly proposed with before. But a friend of ours 3D printed a ring pop ring case. And so it was in that. It's very clever.
That's smart. Cool.
The longest of cons.
Yeah, I know you guys have been together for quite a while.
Yeah. I think the fake ring pop proposal was like last summer. I don't know if y'all can hear him in the background, but he's very excited about his pork chop right now. Oh, and the pasta, excuse me.
Welcome, Christy. Christy's another Tyler attorney. We have a good bar association representation tonight.
Bringing me food? Okay, I'm turning my camera off while I eat my dinner. I'll be back shortly.
All right.
Trust me, this is something y'all don't want to see. Hey, Rue. Excuse me, Andrew. I just can't. There's two Andrews in my life now. It's too confusing.
Hey guys.
Andrew, it looks like you guys got some snow.
Yeah, it snowed like 3 or 4 like probably at least 3 inches of like my last night in Tennessee before I came back to base.
Wow.
So yeah, it was fun. It's cool. Glad I got to see it. There's not going to be any snow in San Angelo, so
Yeah.
have a little winter.
Did it actually stick, or was it just flurries?
It stopped. We even got to throw a few snowballs.
I'm so jealous. Hey, Seth, I'm going to mute you. We've got some keyboard clicks in the background.
Sure.
Everybody's shy today with the cameras off.
Andrew, where are you? Where are you today? Are you at basic training?
I'm at tech school. So I'm at school for my job in the Air Force. Actually, we'll
AIT,
start classes
called
on
AIT
Thursday.
in the Army. Advanced Individual Training.
They just call it tech school in the Air Force. But yeah, essentially AIT.
Well, Seth, my sister just joined. Her name is Jill Sheely. You'll see her on. She's in Washington State, and I'll bet she's got my two nephews, or at least one of them, on as well. Let's see who this is. Jill? Show your video. Okay.
Everybody's quiet today. Any other?
MFA, I saw your message. How are you feeling? Or if you can talk.
Sound terrible.
Oh.
Today's the hardest day on my body. I feel the most tired today than the other days, but I am getting better. I think it is, the worst is over, but it's just taking a while.
Well, speedy recovery to you. I can only imagine that is not fun.
No, my husband got sick the week of Christmas, and so Christmas and New Year's, we were both sick. So it can only get better from here.
Happy to have you listen in, Jill.
Oh, cool. We'll give a couple more minutes for some people to join in. We were sharing some New Year's festivities and what y'all did. So if anybody wants to join in and share that, Delane shared a really cool one with us. So I'd love to hear from anybody else. What's up, Paige?
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
I am driving right now, so I'm probably going to stay on mute for most of the time. Just FYI. But I'm here. Same. But I will share, while I'm not on mute, I'll share my New Year's thing since y'all are talking about it. My gift from my fiance was a 2-night stay at the Gaylord Texan, and it was the best thing of all year. It was so nice.
Awesome.
So that's what we did for New Year's. If y'all have never been there, highly recommend it. Christmas, by the way. It's beautiful.
You know, I never actually went over to check it out while I lived there in Dallas.
Oh,
I was like,
it's
I've been in Nashville. I've been to the Gaylord Opryland, and it is amazing. And I was like, wow, I probably should have looked at the Gaylord Texan while I was in Dallas. So I'll have to do that sometime.
I've heard that Nashville's the biggest, but Dallas has the most character. I've never been to Nashville, so I can't speak to it, but the Dallas one definitely has a lot of character.
Nashville's has like multiple atriums of like botanical gardens. There's a boat. There's a waterway in one of them that you can take a boat ride around. It's crazy. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's like going to Vegas, but not.
Yes, without the casino. But yeah, it's a lot like the Vegas hotels. It's ridiculous, but impressive.
I didn't realize the Gaylord Opryland was like a thing until watching bowl games last week. And the was it the Nashville Music City, whatever they call it, the one that's in Nashville. They kept showing advertisements for it, and it was like, holy cow, is this place a hotel or a theme park?
Just a hotel. There used to be a theme park. Now it's just a hotel.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get things rolling here, everybody. And as people filter in, they can join in. I'm sure, as normal, MFA's got the recording going, at least when we get started here. So we'll have access to that. Welcome, everybody, and Happy New Year. It is great to see all your faces. You know, we're halfway through our Rotary year now, so that was, you know, great work to everybody who's been participating in our service projects and, you know, and working with the club and attending these meetings. It's been, you know, amazing having you here. We don't have a ton of announcements like on the service and stuff this week. Last week, with people traveling and sick, we didn't meet as a board to put together the next project and cover some of those things. So we'll be today just kind of jumping right into to our speaker. So I'm going to let Wes make the introduction, and we'll pass it over here.
Were you waiting on me?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Wes. I don't know if you heard me. I said I'd let you make the introduction.
Yeah.
And then we can get started.
All right. Let me take it off. So, okay. Well, Seth Kretzer and I have been working together, I guess, doing our law practice for about 4 years now. And we have just a wild ride. And so, before I tell you his pedigree, he and I are like salt and pepper, or you know, the odd couple. We complement each other perfectly in the way we get along. Seth is brilliant. He thinks faster than anyone I've ever met. He has a wonderful, nearly photographic memory. You can ask him anything about politics, and he's going to know the middle name of everybody you've ever met in politics and how they got where they are or what they accomplished without any credentials or talent or ability. And so he's a fascinating individual, rancondor, I guess. And he is from Houston. His father and mother were teachers, and they turned their considerable talents to their most important pupil. And his father was a professor at the Baylor Medical School in Houston for decades. His mother was a teacher at a junior high school, teaching middle school students the most difficult age of any kid. English, I believe. Was it? I think it was English. It was in English. What was it? What was it, Dana? Okay, I'm not picking up sound.
It was U.S. history.
Oh, history. Okay, all right. And how is it you know Seth? What was the connection?
I have known Seth since eighth grade, maybe seventh grade. His mom was my U.S. eighth grade history teacher, and Seth used to come in the classroom sometimes.
Right.
And we went to high school together. We went to college together. We went to law school together.
Good.
And we
Great.
even lived in the same apartment complex during college.
Okay. So Seth went to the University of Texas after he graduated from high school, and he went undergraduate and then went into the law school. After finishing in law school, he clerked for a federal judge in Texarkana. After that, he clerked for another federal judge on the Fifth Circuit. Those are considered prestigious. Not very many students get those opportunities. It's considered like finishing school for attorneys, or what you might call residency for medical students. And after that, he worked for a prestigious law firm doing boring litigation, and then he went out on his own and began swimming the travails of self-employment as an attorney. He began doing a number of death penalty cases in addition to regular appeal work. And those death penalty cases have if you'll pardon the bad pun, they have a life of their own. And so we're going to talk about one of these cases shortly, but that is Seth Kretzer, one of the most interesting and accomplished people you'll ever meet, and a gifted attorney. So thank you, Seth, for joining us tonight, sharing your experience.
On mute.
Yeah, Seth, I muted you earlier because there was background noise, but you should be able to mute yourself. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little microphone.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, so Wes stated it pretty much correctly. I was a very bad big firm associate. I did not enjoy it, and I went out on my own. And the first day I was open, the Fifth Circuit appointed me to represent a guy who had killed 19 people accidentally. He didn't mean to kill anybody, and I got his case reversed on appeal, to the astonishment of pretty much everybody involved, and it was my very first case. So ever since then, I've always just seemed to have a lot of death penalty cases around. My first case was a rare federal death penalty prosecution. Probably 99% of all the death penalty cases in the country that are brought by state prosecutors. And I did my first oral argument in the Supreme Court 5 years ago in a death penalty case from Texas, and both of the two cases I've argued in the Supreme Court in the last 5 years have been death penalty cases, and in both of those cases, the very first hearing was in the Supreme Court of the United States. These cases were largely regarded as run-of-the-mill, uneventful cases that were processed through as sort of unpublished per curiam opinions until, for one reason or another, we tickled the Supreme Court's fancy. In Ramirez, it's a little unusual in that it was not habeas. So usually in most cases, a state-level DA has made a decision to seek the death penalty because there's various factors involved. You killed more than one person in the same criminal episode. You killed someone during the commission of a sexual assault. You killed a police officer in the scope of his duties. You killed a child under a certain age. Just killing someone alone is not going to get you the death penalty, but there's certain factors that have to be satisfied. So a DA has sought the death penalty, and as soon as they do that, that makes for a much longer trial. It's one of the reasons a lot of modern DAs do not like the death penalty, is how much longer this stretches out what is ordinarily be a relatively simple proceeding. So you have probably a month-long jury selection to get a death qualified jury. People are questioned extensively on their religious beliefs about the death penalty in most circumstances. And then you have a two-phase trial. So there's a guilt-innocence phase where the jury has to find that someone is death eligible. And then there's a punishment phase with brand new opening arguments and so forth. And the jury can pick between, in Texas, death or life without the possibility of parole. And the defendant is entitled to put on mitigation. And mitigation is kind of a term of art that's probably the most powerful tool to the extent the defendant has any tools available to him. Basically, you might call it colloquially beg for your life. And so you get to put on various themes that you might work up. For example, your mother drank alcohol while she was pregnant, or she drank gasoline while she was pregnant, or you were tortured as a child, or all these horrible things befell you that would lessen your moral blameworthiness for the defendant. And various jury psychologists have debated for years whether or not any of this stuff actually works, but you are entitled to put this on. John Henry Ramirez was probably one of the least sympathetic folks to come along, and then he chose not to put on mitigation. So you probably would not seek the death penalty on Ramirez in a city like Houston. He had no criminal history. He was a military guy growing up in Corpus Christi. One night, he and two women friends of his were just high on drugs, and they were searching for drug money. And they saw Pablo Castro, who was a man with 7 or 8 children, a trash worker who was taking the trash out after a restaurant or some business closed late at night. And John Henry Ramirez went up and stabbed him numerous times and killed him and got $1.25. Ramirez's 2 co-defendants, these 2 other women who were with him, they were captured right away. Ramirez fled down into Mexico. He probably would have been better served to surrender the Mexican consulate because Mexico, like most countries in the world, does not have a death penalty. And so they will not extradite you until the U.S. waives the death penalty. Instead, he did not do that. He stayed down there for a couple years and then came back to see his mother, at which point he was apprehended and arrested and tried, in which they sought the death penalty. And Ramirez is a somewhat difficult guy, and he decided not to put on mitigation. That's usually the strongest terrain that the habeas lawyer can shoot at. So once there's a direct appeal, there's a state habeas, and the whole thing goes to federal habeas, and there's sort of check, review, re-review. Ramirez just didn't waive mitigation. The first mitigation witness, I think it was his father, testified, please don't kill my son. And they took, 6 o'clock came, the trial recessed for the day. That evening, he met with his lawyers and decided to waive mitigation. So the trial judge, being very smart, had the lawyers proffer all the other mitigation witnesses they had lined up in the hall, ready to go. And Ramirez waived that. He just chose for mitigation to read a passage from the Bible, whereupon he was convicted and sentenced to the death penalty. It was a very uneventful state direct appeal, a very uneventful state habeas, until you understand in the old days, a lawyer came on for the state habeas. And that state habeas guy probably has the most bird's eye view of the whole thing. It's his job to find what happened at the trial that should not have happened or what didn't happen in the trial that should have happened. And in the old days, those people stayed on into the federal habeas. And when the Supreme Court said the federal habeas lawyer could bring up new claims, even the state habeas lawyer had missed them, there was an obvious conflict of interest. If the same guy stayed on for federal habeas, you'd be in the position of grading your own papers or something. It'd be like asking a doctor to testify to his malpractice in a case he participated in. Well, of course, he's going to have emotional real estate in not reaching that conclusion. So Ramirez's lawyer did not disclose to the federal district judge that he had this conflict. And so his habeas petition was processed in due course and processed through the Fifth Circuit, and he got his first death penalty date in 2017. And John Henry, being very creative, sitting there on death row, figured out that his own lawyer had a conflict and sent a letter to the federal judge, Ramos, said my lawyer had a conflict and please don't execute me. So she held a hearing, and she was livid that this lawyer did not disclose that he had this conflict. And the Attorney General's office said, well, Judge, we hate to bring this up, but actually this lawyer did know he had the conflict because we just had to yank another execution where he did the same thing. And then she got more livid at the Attorney General's office for not disclosing this to her. So, like, you didn't tell me. So she pulled off granted a stay of the entire execution, at which point the secretary called me and asked me if I would take the case, and I said no. I was getting ready to go do the Davila argument and in the Supreme Court, and I was not taking any more death penalty cases. And then 10 minutes later, Judge Ramos called, and I know her, and she asked me again to take the case, and this time, of course, she had to say yes, so I did. And there really wasn't too much to do for the guy. So there's an old saying in the courthouse, if you can't get an acquittal, a reset is the next best thing. And so I got him a reset. So off we were.
Seth, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Go to the Supreme Court. What describe?
Sure.
These folks haven't seen the inside. What does the Supreme Court look like inside?
Yeah, Supreme Court is surprisingly small. A lot of people are shocked at how small of a courtroom it is. You're maybe 8-10 feet from the Chief Justice. You're very close in. It's much more conversational. They've even backed the podium up a little bit due to COVID. But the Supreme Court room itself is really not very broad. It has a magnificently high ceiling. One of the prettiest ceilings is almost like seeing a chapel in Europe. But the Supreme Court room itself is rather small, so you're very close in.
How far away is the Supreme Court from the other buildings, like the Capitol or the White House?
Oh, it's at the other end of Maryland Avenue, goes right up to the Supreme Court. So you look right out at the Capitol. So the Capitol's across the street. The White House is probably 2 miles away down Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay. But you look from the steps of the Supreme Court, look directly out at the Capitol.
So what's it like to get up in the morning at the hotel room, and you get up and you've got to argue in front of the Supreme Court in an hour and a half?
This case Sure. This case was much different the morning of than the other case I had done there because of the astounding amount of publicity. And it just so happened that the morning of this oral argument, I woke up to the news that Sister Prejean, she who had been played by Susan Sarandon in the movie, published an op-ed that morning in the New York Times in support of our position. So, you know, that got more attention than, you know, anything I would have done. And so now at that point, I'd been up there. I looked over all the materials one more time, and you know, just told myself to take it slow. You don't want to drink any, you know, no coffee within 2 hours of going over there, because you know, once we go, we're not stopping.
So how many justices are there, and who are they?
Sure, there's 9 justices. Both times I've argued there have been 9. When I argued in Davila, that was Gorsuch's first week on the court. That was April of 2017. Since then, obviously, there's new ones. Kavanaugh, who, you know, controversially just went in to replace the retiring Kennedy. Barrett, who had been on for just about a year, she, you know, of course, replaced Justice Ginsburg, who died, I don't know, was it 2-3 weeks before the election. And then, obviously, so the Chief Justice is in the middle, and then they go in order of seniority. So Clarence Thomas is to his right, and then I don't know all in order, but Kavanaugh being the second most juniors at the far left, and Amy Coney Barrett being the most juniors at the far right. Next to her is Justice Gorsuch. I don't know if I know them all in order, but basically Sotomayor is, you know, next to Justice Gorsuch. Kagan is to the other side of her. So there's the 9 of them.
All right. So in February, the good folks in the county judge and the attorney general and the AGs decide it's time for an execution, and they get an execution date in February, right?
Well, it's the DA who does this. So once the federal appeals are done, at that point, the attorney general's office takes the position it's up to the DA, the elected district attorney of the county, to seek a death warrant. So I don't believe the attorney general's office is involved with that piece of it. The district attorney files a motion with the judge to get a death warrant.
All right. So there's a hearing in February. The judge says, okay, Mr. Ramirez, you're going to be sentenced to die. You're sentenced to die. You're going to be executed on September the 9th, I believe, and 8th. And may God have mercy on your soul. Does he say that or anything like that? Something dramatic?
No, I mean, under state law, you have to be at least 90 days out, and our attorney general's office usually likes at least 6 months out. So a February to September lead time is not terribly uncommon. And so, yeah.
So you now have an execution date. You have a client who doesn't like you, and there are other attorneys, I understand, who watch these cases, who have strong opinions about the death penalty, and take action in these cases against the attorney. So did you have any concerns about having any legal issues that you could raise in litigation to take you down to the wire, or that you might be without any claims going into this that might create a problem for you?
Yes, in every one of these cases, there are lawyers, the sort of chorus of unhappy people, objectors, who will come along and say whatever you did, it was wrong. And their goal is to get someone to stay the execution. They know that death warrants are only good from 6 p.m. till midnight. So if they can throw you under the bus and situate the case so that some judge will stay it, they know that could mean it'd be years before he's executed again. And so we had a clemency petition ready to go. This is completely separate. You're obligated to basically ask the governor to, you know, yank the death warrant. I think Abbott did it once. I think Rick Perry did it once. Maybe Bush did it once. I mean, this has happened like 3 or 4 times in the last 30 years. And then, yes, I do try to find some issues for a successor writ. And I actually asked Judge Ramos for funding to develop such issues, assuming she would say no, and I would appeal the denial of funding. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, she granted me the funding. And I was like, I didn't want you to grant the funding, but generous as she was, she did.
Right. So let me put this in context for our good friends here. There's this whole group of attorneys who are very vocal, strident is the word I'm looking for, against the death penalty. And here you are going into an execution in September without any legal issues, except you asked for funding to do some sort of bogus investigation, some sort of questionable, almost bogus, some sort of
Right.
you know, marginal investigation, and she gave you the money, so you can't even complain about that.
Right.
All right. So
Yeah.
now you're facing the worst of all worlds. You're going into an execution with nothing to say about it for the execution. Now, what changed things? Did you get a phone call or what happened?
No, it's actually started a year earlier. So originally they got an execution date on Ramirez in February of 2020. So everything that happened in 2020, we basically did a year to the day later in 2021. It was almost eerie. And so they got the execution date in February of 2020. And that, of course, was right before COVID exploded. And I told the people at the Attorney General's office throughout the spring and summer of 2020 that, if they went through this execution and there was a COVID outbreak, they would have a PR disaster on their hands, and they would sort of roll their eyes and say, we know. And you have to understand, death penalty actual executions have gone through the floor since COVID. And so they were looking for a reason to withdraw the execution date. And at the same time, this interesting issue had bubbled up regarding these spiritual advisors. And this goes back a couple years. A Buddhist man on death row declared he'd become a Buddhist, wanted his spiritual advisor. The prison said, we have no Buddhist chaplain, so you can't have one. That went up to the Supreme Court fairly quickly, who said, no way. To say you can't not have a Buddhist spiritual advisor would be like no Jews allowed, no Muslims allowed. And so they said no. Texas decided to change the rule to say we'll have no more spiritual advisors of any kind, and that caused its own degree of problems. So I came along and filed, this is in 2020, a tag-along lawsuit. I literally just copied and pasted what they had written, and miracle of miracles, they called and said, would you withdraw your lawsuit if we withdrew the death warrant? And I said, is this a joke? Of course we'll do that. So we withdrew the lawsuits. We had a preview of this. And then I knew this was still there in the background. And they got Russ is right, they got the death warrant in February. In April, they sent us the new policy. So the Attorney General's office, the woman at the AG's office tasked with handling the case, emails me, says, here's the new policy. Feel free to read it. And I read it. And it says you may have any minister of your choosing in the death chamber with you. So I thought, oh, well, they gave up. And the rule had been no ministers. Now they're saying you can have any minister. We figured they had just walked away, and that was the end of it. And as late as the summer, I assumed that there was no issue with the minister being in the chamber because, again, their policy says he can be back there. And at that point, and with Wes's help, I started to communicate with this pastor in Corpus Christi, who at this point I'd never actually spoken to before. And he was telling me they had heard through the grapevine that they would not allow the pastor to touch the inmate. They were going to put all these restrictions on him. And he told me that in his faith system, laying on of hands is very important. That's something that he does. And so I said, if you'll give me an affidavit to that effect, swear, testimony, I can attach a petition to give the court that this is what you do in your faith system, I will file a new federal civil rights lawsuit. So I'll take the one we filed last year, I'll file it again, and we'll attach this to it. And
Okay, so you've got an issue brewing, finally. You've
Right.
got an issue, all right? And what is your religious background?
I'm Jewish. I mean,
Okay. All right. So here's the Jewish attorney going.
I admit
going to
I
bat
did not know as much as I learned last year about various faith systems. Various faith systems have special ministrations surrounding death and exactly the significance of some of these. It's the various religious groups that ultimately filed the Miki briefs. I learned a tremendous amount that I did not know. So.
All right, so you're off to the races. You file your lawsuit, and did you receive a gift from the Attorney General's office?
I did. So we filed the lawsuit, and I admit I thought it was a very weak claim. I mean, to ask Pastor Moore, do you touch all your parishioners as they die? Well, he clearly would not be standing in front of a firing squad or in a gas chamber, or as they still have in San Quentin. That's not an exaggeration. They still have these in several states. Or if he was being electrocuted, which you can still have done if that's how you choose to die in Florida. So I thought it was pretty weak. And then Pastor Moore told me that he had heard they would not allow him to pray out loud. He heard this from another minister. And so I sent a email to this faceless woman at the prison who answers emails from lawyers, and she sent back a letter on official TDCJ stationery, signed in her capacity as the general counsel of the prison, that they would not allow the pastor to pray out loud. And I have no doubt she had no idea the significance of what she just handed. We got that, and I was like, OMG, I cannot believe you actually just said that. I mean, this sounds like something the Romans would do, in the times of the Bible. And so at this point, the article had already come out in the New York Times about the prayer claim. The state had already ordered to respond to the motion to stay. We were well into the litigation, and I amended the petition to add this fact that now the pastor would not be allowed to pray. And I have no doubt the significance of that went past them at the moment. I doubt the Attorney General's office even knew the woman at the prison had said that until they got it, and probably also had an OMG response.
All right. So how did at some point, you've got this in front of a federal judge in Houston.
Correct.
And then the Attorney General files a response to your brief,
right,
opposing it. And this was in August, I believe. Is that right? August. And
right. Let me be
more
specific. So we file the lawsuit. People file these 1983 civil rights claims every day. Prisoners file this stuff all the time. Usually the state answers, and off it goes to litigation. Here, when you have an execution pending, you have to file a motion to stay the execution. Functions like an injunction. I mean, obviously you want to keep the state from executing them, but what you really want is an order from the federal court saying, state, you may not execute the guy. So Judge Hittner entered a scheduling order and said, if you're going to file such a motion, file it by this day, and the state will respond on this day, and you reply on this day. And so we proceeded according to his scheduling order.
All right. And so you're 30 days out from the execution, less than
right.
30 days at this point, about 3 weeks. And so
right.
you file your response, and then finally, are you keeping the Supreme Court informed of what you're doing? Is it going to be a surprise to them, or?
Oh yeah, no, I'm very different than some of the other lawyers. Like, there's a lawyer in Houston who's great at filing motions to stay at breakfast, and he goes to the Fifth Circuit at lunch, and goes to the Supreme Court in time for dinner. I have nowhere near that level of adventurism. So no, we do this stuff way far out, and I start emailing. There's a woman who has a horrible job in the Supreme Court. She's called the Princess of Death. Her job is to track every execution in America, and she has walk-in privileges to the circuit justice. So the Fifth Circuit's justice assigned is Justice Alito. As I understand her job, she has the ability to take an application to stay in execution and put it directly on his desk. She can walk right in there. That's part of her job responsibilities.
So the Supreme Court Death Penalty clerk is getting copies of these and showing them to at least one of the justices. They know what's coming. They know what's coming. And of course, they read the New York Times and the Washington Post and some of these other
Yeah, the media dimension of this was a surprise to me. I was shocked after the lawsuit was filed that the New York Times, Ruth Graham, the religion reporter, showed such an interest in this. This was a religion section piece, not a legal piece. She wrote a whole piece about Ramirez and how horrible it was that he was not going to be allowed to have the laying on of hands at the point in time that he was executed. And so around the same time all my briefs were due, he became somewhat of a media celebrity. In like 2 weeks, he gave interviews to the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Times of London, Christianity Today, and a different Christian publication. It was amazing to me how sympathetic he looked. And Wes is correct. There's no doubt they read the New York Times at the Supreme Court, and so they, oh wow, this case is percolating down there in Texas. So it definitely apprised them of that informally.
So when did the district court, the trial judge in Houston, make a decision? How far away?
It was all Labor Day. All happened that right going into Labor Day. He ruled, I believe, on September either 3rd or 4th. Labor Day weekend, the Fifth Circuit brief was filed the next day. They entered their opinion on September 6th, which was Labor Day, and the woman at the Supreme Court asked me not to file my application that day because it messes up their afternoon barbecue. So I said, fine. So we did not file that until Tuesday morning. So it was waiting for them when they arrived, and the execution was on Wednesday. And several people had asked me why the state put this execution the same day as Labor Day weekend. They don't like things that mess up these long holiday weekends. But regardless of the chronology of that week, Monday was Labor Day. Tuesday was, ironically enough, Rosh Hashanah. So I assure you Justice Kagan was not in that day. And then Wednesday at 6 p.m. was the time of the execution to go. So,
All right. So what did the district court rule?
yeah, the district court, everyone said no. We lost every step of the way. The district
Briefly,
court said
yeah.
no.
Yeah, and
But
then you took it to the.
the district court merged touching and praying. Nobody cleaved this distinction between touch and prayer that was so important to the state.
And then the Fifth Circuit gets it next. And what did the Fifth Circuit do with it? Who were those judges?
Yeah, we had three of them. It was Higginbotham, who was originally appointed to the trial court by Gerald Ford. It's not easy to still be alive if you were appointed to something by Gerald Ford. He's very, very old. He's been doing this for a long time. Priscilla Owen, who was Chief Judge of the Fifth Circuit, was on the Texas Supreme Court for many years and is now engaged to the Chief Justice of Texas, Nathan Hecht. And they too are very conservative. They ruled against us. And then there's a very liberal judge on the Fifth Circuit, Judge Dennis, who's even older than Higginbotham. He's ancient. I mean, he was on the Louisiana Supreme Court for 20 years before Clinton put him on the Fifth Circuit. And he can barely even talk anymore, but he's just hanging on. So he wrote this long dissent, basically saying that we would win and he would grant the stay and so forth. So I was able to go to the Supreme Court with a rare dissent from the Fifth Circuit.
And then, so you filed in the Supreme Court on the morning of the execution or the day before?
No, the day before. That was Tuesday morning. It was ready to go, I assume, at 8 a.m. right when they got there.
All right. So nothing happened on Tuesday, and then Wednesday comes, and the guy's going to be strapped down at 6 o'clock?
Correct. The state did not respond until Wednesday morning, which surprised me. And then I got a reply on file 2 hours later. I asked the woman at the Supreme Court not to take it to Alito until I got my reply on file, and I told her that would come before noon.
All right. So at about noon, you've got your reply on, and it's 6 o'clock. They're going to strap him down. He gets a chance for a final meal, I guess. Mm-hmm. No more fancy meal, but they give him a meal
Yeah, they're obligated to treat you humanely until the last minute. I don't know how far in advance of the execution they let you eat, but I'm sure they have legal requirements how long they can go without feeding you. I mean,
so 6 o'clock is coming up on the clock, and Pastor, where is Ramirez then? Is he in the execution room? Where is the pastor?
So the way I'm told it works, so you're executed in Huntsville. They hold you in Livingston. Texas death row for men is in Livingston. Huntsville is about an hour away, and that's where they have the whole death apparatus. And they have a whole procedure whereby you get moved that morning from Livingston to Huntsville, and there's various designated prayer times when the pastor can meet with Ramirez, although never touch him. They're very adamant about that. They can never have a contact visit. And they hold you in some sort of ante-room. And by which I mean, in Texas, they're very worried that somebody might get overeager and flip the switch. They won't hook you up until the Supreme Court has denied, and there's no pending motion anywhere in any court. And so they're very adamant about that. So they have a whole process whereby, for a CYA move, the warden won't take you in and hook you up until the lawyer for the Attorney General's office has signed off that they represent there's no motion pending anywhere unless they violate the order.
So Ramirez is in the next room, in the waiting room, mm-hmm. and the pastor is where?
It's a good question. The pastor was in the, I don't know, Wes, if he was ever actually taken into the death chamber or not. I assume he was in the waiting area. I don't know if they ever took him into the death chamber because Ramirez was never taken into the death chamber.
Yeah. All right. So 6 o'clock comes. What happens? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nothing. It was incredible. I was in Houston, and at 6 o'clock, we still hadn't gotten the ruling from the Supreme Court. So 6 turned into 7. Yeah, we didn't get a rule. At this point, I'm getting emails from reporters at CNN with wonderful subject lines like WTF ? And OMG ! And the New York Times reporter is like, what time will they rule? I said, sometime in the next 4 hours and 17 minutes, man. I don't know what to tell you. When they do it, they do it. I mean, I asked Neil Gorsuch. I mean, how the hell am I supposed to know when they do it? So, no, it wasn't until about 10 o'clock at night that I
And
got a call.
that's in 10 o'clock in Texas. What about in the East Coast?
That would have been 11 o'clock at night there. Huh?
Yeah, Supreme Court justices, 11 o'clock at night in D.C.
Right, and so basically they yanked it about 2 hours before the death warrant would have expired. And here's where it got different. See, all of these others had been resolved on what gets a lot of press. It's called the shadow docket, which had gotten a lot of press the week before. The Supreme Court had denied relief on that Texas abortion bill. And these are these sort of orders they summarily grant or deny without an oral argument. And all of the other cases, the Buddhist, the Christian guy who wanted his pastor, this guy from Alabama, these had all been resolved on the shadow docket with these short orders. And so I thought they might stay the execution and dismiss it similarly as they had on the shadow docket. But so when the woman from the Supreme Court called and she said, Seth, we're going to stay the execution, I said, I'm not surprised. It's pretty late. I figured you were going to do that. I said, what was the vote count? Who were the dissents? And she said there were no dissents. And I was like, you got Clarence Thomas on this thing? He's never voted to stay in execution in 32 years. I mean, that's amazing, really? She goes, no, we're doing something different on this case. They're not going to resolve it on the shadow docket. They're just going to, stay the execution. They're going to set an expedited brief schedule with your brief due in 3 weeks and oral argument in October or November. And to explain just how much quicker that is, that'd be like comparing a jogger to Carl Lewis or something. I mean, nothing moves at all that quickly. And so at that moment, I did not know how loud the media attention was amped on this case. Within 10 minutes, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, everyone's calling and they want to do Zoom interviews. And it just ricocheted all around the world to an extent I had no idea. I was amazed that people are at 10:30 at night, they're putting the children to bed, they're in their slippers, and they're reading this damn blog to see what might happen with this case. It's incredible.
Right. Now, so here you are, you've got cert granted, and now you've got a short period of time to get your brief done, and you've got to practice for oral argument. Okay, so in the time we have left, tell us briefly, how did go over and get one of the copies of the briefs from your desk, and show what a brief looks like in the Supreme Court. We can't hear you, so wait till you get back.
Yeah, I mean, here's one of the amici briefs. You can get these all online. I mean, if you go to the Supreme Court and type in this cause number, you can get all of them. And so they're not terribly long. I mean, this one is a whopping 33 pages, even on this super short booklet format.
But it's not a brief 8.5 by 11. It's in a booklet that you have to file, correct?
Correct. The Supreme Court is adamant. They still have elevator operators in the Supreme Court. Okay, I mean, it lives in a different century. They give you a quill feather pen for arguing in the Supreme Court. I mean, it doesn't work like a modern operation. And so yes, there's a special booklet and there's only one company in America that I trust to actually print these things according to the way they want them done. And so yes, there's a special printing process you have to go through.
Now, how did you get ready to actually make your arguments? Did you have to practice, or did you just make some notes ahead of the night before?
No, I mean, I affiliated with the UT Law School Supreme Court Clinic. So I called them, I don't know if it was that late that night or early the next morning, and I said, I need you, you're not going to believe what happened, but we have a brief due in 3 weeks if you want it. And so, yeah, I mean, they signed up and affiliated. And then, unlike 5 years ago, we had Zoom. So all these law schools have these Supreme Court clinics, as well as friends of mine at various law firms that have a lot of former Supreme Court clerks. So I probably did about 8 moot courts in this one in person at the UT clinic, one with some appellate lawyers I know here in Houston, and then all the others were by Zoom.
And what is a moot court? What's a moot court?
Sure, people have their chance to play justice. You can pretend to be channel your inner Justice Roberts or whoever you've always wanted to be, and then they ask you questions, and we tell them, ask me, where I'm weakest, and I practice giving you answers.
All right, and you did this how many times?
I think I did 8 this time.
And are any of these are these attorneys who are speaking to you, are they any of them former clerks of the Supreme Court?
A lot of them are. I mean, it's Sussman Godfrey, who are pretty good friends of mine. I asked them in a great act of generosity, one of the top billing law firms in the country. They put their they probably have 8 former Supreme Court clerks at that firm, and they agreed to read the briefs, prepare questions, and ask them of me.
So you got your brief filed, and that was an ordeal, and you practiced exceedingly for the next 3 weeks. You practiced almost every day on your arguments. And then finally the day came and you went to the Supreme Court. So talk about that. Talk about your arguments to the
Sure.
court.
A lot of it changed. In ordinary times, getting into the Supreme Court itself is a production. It's almost a military operation where they get people in and out. People start waiting at 4 o'clock in the morning to get a seat in the Supreme Court. That was all different this time because for COVID, they had gone to all telephonic arguments. And so this time they announced a couple weeks earlier they were reopening and doing them in person, but there was no public allowed. So the day before you had to go get a PCR test. You had to wear your mask at all times except when you were arguing, and so forth. So you did not have the friends and family looking down on you, which from the first case I did, I thought was the scariest part of the whole thing was having 50 people you knew looking at you, the eyeballs searing into the back of your jacket. So this time it was just one lawyer, 2 lawyers per side. The justices, the law clerk, the bailiff, the court reporter. You did not have the packed room like you usually do.
All right. And so the justices began firing questions at you. How did it go?
You get a couple changes have been made in the last 2 years. Good things to arise from COVID. One is that these are live streams. Even though they've been tape recorded since 1955, they're all available online. Now these are all live streamed. Second, you as the lawyer are now given 2 minutes of uninterrupted time. I think for Davila, we assume we get 15 seconds out. You say, "May it please Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court," and then you start your argument. This time, though, they've decided to allow you 2 minutes of uninterrupted time. So I had practiced an opening that came out to exactly 1 minute and 55 seconds every time we practiced it. And then another desirable is that Chief Justice Thomas, who had not spoken but in 25 years, asked the first question. So you know that he's going to ask the very first one.
And you actually had your opening statement laminated, is that right?
Yeah. I had it laminated, and that's just something I've always done to make sure we have things right where you can see them. And beyond that, I had a few notes written out, but I didn't know where the questions would come from after that. I had a pretty good idea, but I read the opening, and then we were ready to do a shot.
All right. So what were some of the questions you got?
Yeah, there was not a single question that nobody had given us ahead of time. My sister, who was standing on the steps with my nephew and Pastor Moore, said when a question would come, she'd be like, "Oh, he has a good answer for this one." Every single thing that was asked. The question that's always the most important to them is, will this not open up the floodgates? In other words, will not every inmate now go and demand a minister? Which, of course, yes. If you have a client on death row, you have an execution date, you should say, listen, you really, really want a chaplain to touch you who is not employed by the Texas prison. That seems to really piss them off. And there was an article in Texas Monthly, "Why has Texas stopped executing people?" And the owner of Texas Monthly is a friend of mine. I know her, Randa. And I said, "Randa, are you trying to have these people eat me alive in the Supreme Court? I mean, you have to rub their face in it." This has largely brought Texas death row to a halt because they weren't going to allow any other executions to go forward until this was resolved. So that was the question they had is, how do we avoid the floodgates? And if we allow your guy to be touched on the foot, does the next person have to touch him on his heart? If somebody has a conversion to a new religion, does we now have to cancel the execution? I was prepared for a question, do we have to change the bed to face Mecca if a Muslim declares that he needs to face Mecca? And what do we do with these minority faiths? If everyone asked about the Wiccans, I heard more about Wiccans and they're bring a bird into the chamber. What would happen if you want to designate your wife as your spiritual advisor, so you get an otherwise impermissible contact visit with your wife right before you die. The one who was probably the most aggressive, I didn't know this going into this, it would be, was Kavanaugh. He's the one who took the greatest interest in this and asked most of the questions. The most important question, the one that really surprised me when it came up at a moot court, is the interest of the victims. In other words, if it's important to your client to have a pastor when he dies in order to aid his ascension into heaven, well, does that mean that your client believes that Mr. Pablo Castro went to hell because he did not have a priest with him when your client shanked him 18 times? And when that question first came up, I didn't have any particularly good answers. We don't ask the victims, how they choose to punish or torture the inmate before they execute him. I did not have a good answer for that at my first moot court. By the time Kavanaugh asked me that question, I had the answer ready to go. I had nothing but the greatest sympathy for the Castro family. And, we talked about compassion and the trials at Nuremberg. Read this one that this historical group filed. It's amazing. We gave the Nazis pastors before we hung them. In ancient England, we even let the pastor ride with you in the little cart up to the rope where they tied around your neck and they drove the cart away. That's how they hung you. But you got to have the pastor with you every step of the way back in those days. So we had answers. I had answers ready for all those questions by the time I got there in a way that I probably did not at the first moot court.
Well, let's throw that open for any other questions here
Sure.
in the time we have. Anybody have questions they want to ask?
I had a question because you
Sure.
mentioned how much media played into this. How does the media even find out about a case like this in the first place?
You call the reporter and you just call them and say, hey, you have any interest in this? I didn't think there would be much media interest in it. I really did not. I was shocked at, well, one, the media interest going up to the execution, and then two, the media interest once the execution was stayed, in that some of the most conservative pro-death penalty organizations in America came in support of my client. Okay, in other words, it was the New Republic had a piece entitled "The State of Texas versus Jesus Christ," and basically, General Paxton was trying to decrease the prayer. We were trying to increase the amount of prayer. And I was shocked at how much. My favorite was the Linda Greenhouse had an opinion piece in the New York Times, the title of which was a polemical, why did the Supreme Court say that had a picture of John Henry wearing a cross? And of course, the answer I would give, because it was lawyer lady, I mean, how do you think they stayed the execution? I'll answer that. I was like, no, I'll tune in on November 8th. In fact, what first was November 1st. They moved it back to November 8th, but for even other reasons. But so yeah, and once that, the media just took off, and then they just start calling the prison, asking if they can go see the guy, and our guy's perfectly happy to. The Washington Post went down to Corpus. They did a whole weekend. They went and interviewed members of the church, and I mean, they went all out on this thing.
Okay. Other questions? Anybody else got a question?
Was this guy an active member in his church?
Yeah, that was one of the good things. He actually joined. Pastor Moore started to minister to him in the year 2016, so 5 years earlier. And that was, every time you go into prison, it's documented. Maybe they didn't dispute that he really was a pastor. And that is a little bit different than the Buddhist guy. With the Buddhist guy, the subtle background was this guy calls himself a Buddhist reverend. His name is really Gordon Smith, and he's an accountant in Houston. He just sort of doubles as a Buddhist reverend. And is it really real? My guy, I mean, is great. We had, here's his website, and here's all of his publications, and he's been going to see him for 5 years. And, the state kept saying he was this great threat, and he was going to take hostages, and he was going to do this, that, and the other. Our guy was almost out of central casting in terms of a, nice post-middle-age pastor who didn't seem to be a terrible threat to anybody.
Other questions?
Hey, on the 2 points that James Dennis, the circuit judge, relied on your brief, the audible prayer and then the physically touching.
Right.
Did any of the justices indicate that they would only rule on the audible prayer and not the physical touching?
My suspicion is they're going to emerge with a rule that you can pray. Justice Breyer nailed the state down on this. He said, can you give me a single example anywhere in the world in the last 100 years where any pastor has interrupted an execution? And they said no. So they're hypothesizing against some invisible risk that's never actually happened in history. I think they're going to rule. It goes back thousands of years in history. We asked the state. This has been literally, you cannot stop them from praying. On the touch, my suspicion is they're going to send this back to the federal trial judge to make findings as to whether or not it can ever be done in a way that's not dangerous. In other words, we said the pastor could touch his foot when the needle is up here in his arm. What do you do? Where does the court draw a line and say, no, the pastor can't put his touch right here, where the site of the injection is? So I think they're going to send it back to the district court to make those findings.
And realistically, it looks like you bought him, several months more. So suppose that it rules in your favor based on what you anticipate. How much more time can you buy him after the federal court, the district court rules?
Under the absurd logic of this case, the more successful we are in the Supreme Court, the quicker he'll be executed. If they would just give us an injunction that says you cannot execute the guy until the pastor can touch and pray and so forth, they could either comply with it or admit they're not going to comply with it and just take him off death row. The less successful we are in the Supreme Court, the longer my suspicion is this is going to have to percolate down below. Under the state law, it's 90 days to get a death warrant. So we're January 5th here. So even if they rule tomorrow, there's no indication they are. Even if they rule tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to off this guy in the first quarter of this year. They usually want at least 6 months, which would kick us back into the fall. And then God knows how long the federal court's going to take to have their little mini trial. So the Buddhist guy from 2019, he's still sitting on death row. The guy who came after him is also still sitting on death row. So my suspicion is you won't get an execution date until the year 2023. At the quickest.
And how did your client send you a note of appreciation to tell you how much he appreciated you, Seth?
Yeah, the guy hates me. He always has. He just doesn't like me. And I can't tell you how deeply hurt I am that a guy on death row does not like me, But no, he's never liked me, never has. Nothing about that has changed. So, there.
Is that because the interest groups were pissed off at you because you waited until the very last minute to find a viable argument?
No, he's never liked me from day one. I can't tell you why. He just never has. I can tell you, just speaking broadly, some of these interest groups have nothing to do. They can sit out there all day, every day, and listen to these guys talk. People like Wes and me have to pay the bills, and we'll go meet these folks, but I don't have all day to sit there and listen to you. But women come, if you've never been to death row, you should go. Women come from around the world to marry these guys. It's amazing. I've always asked them, why they're usually not unattractive. Why do you want to marry guys on death row? They always say, well, he's always so excited to see me, and I'm the object of his attention. I know where he is, and he's so loyal. And there's some very lonely people in the world. People come from all over the world to see these Europeans.
Well, I got a puppy.
Yeah, these Europeans are very Catholic and they hate the death penalty, and they come, they make their summer vacation, they go sit there for 3 days, listen to these guys talk. So they like having the attention and so forth. But I remember you have to ask him. I don't know. The guy's never liked me. So it's just.
And he's not going to make parole, so the woman doesn't have to worry about him coming home one day.
Right. Exactly. You're never going to get out of there. That's just the most amazing thing. I represented Max so far, who went to death row when I was 2 years old. He finally died of liver cancer about 35 years. His case spent 4 decades ricocheting back and forth between state and federal court. It never ends. And he cheated the hangman's noose. He died before they could kill him. And so that's kind of a victory in this area of work. But you're never gonna. At most, you'd be negotiating the life population. That's happened a couple times, but no, you're never getting out of there. So
you should write a book about this. This is pretty fascinating.
I mean, like I said, I didn't ask the case. The judge asked me to do it. It's interesting work. This one, I mean, it's not easy to make the guy on death row look sympathetic. The state managed to do that. And they're very hostile just generally. And they like telling you what you can do and what you can't do. And they're so angry all the time. They perhaps unwittingly, in my view, Wes may disagree with me on this, but in my view, they hand people like me a very powerful tool because whatever we say, no matter how extreme it is, they're going to go one step further. So our last argument in the Supreme Court was, see, if Pastor Moore even goes to open his mouth to breathe, you're going to say he's trying to issue the impermissible words of prayer. You're going to carry him out of there so he will not have a pastor when he's executed, which is the policy you really want. And to my amazement, they said, absolutely, that's absolutely what we're going to do. I was like, lady, you just got a cert granted. I mean, you just made this execution. I mean, that was my reaction when I read it, was you've got to be kidding me. No matter what we say, they're going to go one step further. They have given us the control to paint the narrative, and they end up fighting on the terrain of our choice. And, you know, and a surface, we cited the New York Times, we cited Christianity Today. I mean, it was rare to, I don't know that standing alone we would have gotten there. The state certainly helped us in that regard.
So filing, filing fees and your hourly rate, and you were appointed. So how does the payment work on that? And
they waive the filing fees when you're in form of pauperous. They waive all that stuff. The criminal, the reason you don't see too many of these 1983 suits is usually there's fee shifting in 1983 litigation, but under this particular federal statute guaranteeing inmates religious rights, there's no fee shifting. So you can imagine, even though it's a very powerful tool for inmates, there's not too many lawyers out there looking to do work they know they're not going to be paid for. I'm appointed under the Criminal Justice Act, but I assure you, whatever financial hit I take, if you look at the Supreme Court, it's incredible. The number of law firms that wrote amicus briefs in this case, it was amazing. That's probably $1 million of attorney time. I mean, the firms, Harvard Law Clinic, Professor McConnell at Stanford, they wrote that one. Vincent Elkins wrote the brief for the nun who was tweeting about the case, the tweeting nun. Some of the most expensive law firms in the country has donated vast amounts of resources. It was incredible. Look at that docket sheet. That is probably $1 million of attorney time from some of the most premier law firms in the country. Wild, huh? All that to keep a guy from praying.
Just think, Clayton, this is what you have to look forward to now.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's a very niche area of practice. I don't recommend it. But every now and then one of these busts out. And
Michael, I think it's yours.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Seth. That's very interesting. Very interesting.
Don't mess with God. All right. See you later.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your time so much. And we are going to wrap up with our traditional 4-way test here. I'll paste that down in the chat for everybody if you guys want to come off of mute. All right. If everybody's ready, the 4-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Number 1.
Is it the truth?
Number 2.
Is it fair to alter?
Number 3.
Will it develop goodwill and better friendships?
And number 4.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
All right. Thank you all for being here. We will see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Seth.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great
Bye. Have a good night.
Happy New Year.
Good night, everybody.